Tonight, on this edition of The Small Interview, our guest is award-winning RVTV producer, John Letz. Hello and welcome to the Small Interview with Glamour Dave. I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow, and today is an emergency production of the Small Interview as we are filling time here at the studio when another producer who had this time block here canceled at the very last minute. So since my Small Interview show is the quickest show that can get put into production, we're making use of the time to, and so I have with me John Letz, fellow RVTV producer, Raglan Producer of the Year.
Thank you. I almost forgot about that.
Producer and host of Adventures in Education and Ramping Up Your English. And I had previously interviewed John just like about a week or so ago. And so we are continuing the interview with John. We just finished the last segment, and we talked about John's days in radio. And so now we're going to talk about John's life here in Oregon. And his what drove him into becoming a producer here at RVTV and creating and producing the shows, the education programs that he does here at the studio. So, John, I welcome you again to the show.
Thank you, David. And I got to say, part of the whole thing is I fell in love with the state.
Yeah.
The state of Oregon. When I was living over near Creswell, and we're out in the woods, and I would go out every morning with my notebook and write by hand, whatever I was thinking in my head. The mist, the sun comes out, the mist comes up, and then it rains again. Every day. I was here in February and March, and of course they have a much wetter climate up there than they do here. And the green, and that filtered water. I mean, when there's a good forest, the water comes out all filtered and pure. I grew up in Louisiana where the water's like chocolate milk, David. I mean, So this was just wonderful for me. I mean, absolutely wonderful. For economic reasons, I had to go back to Louisiana and live for a while in that house that I helped my dad build.
Yeah, right.
And that was a good time. I like I mentioned in the last show, I hung out with a lot of my friends from high school and stuff, which I hadn't done before being in these major markets and stuff. One of the things I did when I was there, a fellow who helped get me my first job in radio, his name was Paul Marks, somehow got in touch with me because he was working for a TV station there in Lafayette, Louisiana. And so he got in touch with me and said, they're looking for a reporter. Would you like to do some TV work? And I had never done TV work before. I said yes. I was between these jobs and radio anyway, And so I went over there and worked for a short time as a reporter. They were still using film.
Right.
The reporters were given these wind-up film cameras. So you'd wind them up, and you would point them at something, and you were supposed to use the light meter. But I usually didn't have the patience to do it, so I would just shoot. Sometimes it would come out okay, sometimes it wouldn't. Because we'd bring it back to the station, and they would bring it into the dark room. And what do they call that? They would produce the they'd process the film. And so I was doing that. The main photographer, he wasn't a reporter, but he had the big rig, that you go up there. And that film had a little strip of magnetic tape on it, and you could plug a microphone into it. So you get the sound and the film. We did have what they called electronic journalism. It was a big deal at the time. It was video.
Right.
So they had these big old video cartridges, and it was the equipment was so clunky that they had to have a crew of 2. One to hold the camera up, and then he had this big, thick cable going back, and another one with the machine to record it and to do all the levels and everything like that. So they had a crew of 2 that had to do that. So that was my first television experience. It was fun. I liked, being out and around. I always had an interest in news, even when I was in radio. But the thing was, I went on the air. I was supposed to anchor the evening news. So I went on the air, and I'm kind of going along. A friend of mine showed me a little trick about they didn't have teleprompters at that station anyway. So they showed you on the copy, just run your thumb down the script so that when you look down, you don't have to stay down there because your thumb shows you which line you're on. So I'm all, being professional and everything. But I'm going to demonstrate what I did. I looked at the monitor, and I'm supposed to be doing the new, the heavy stuff, and I just went. Like, I'm on TV. Well, it was during that time, and you'll recognize this name from the last program, when Bill Bailey called me and said, would you like to go to St. Louis? And I'm thinking, do I want to stay in small market TV or go back into major market radio? And, history shows that's what I did. So I didn't do any TV after that for a long time. Now, when I came to Medford, there was a station called KISD. And they hired me, after I had written my book and gone back home. I wanted to get back to the Eugene area, but the only opening was in Medford. I thought, well, that's a lot closer than Louisiana. So I took the job. Well, I came up here for that job, and they were a daytime station. When the sun went down, they went off the air. And the last thing you heard on their announcement, their shutdown announcement, is, and now the giant sleeps. Which I thought was pretty cornball. But anyway, here I am back in small market radio. Well, not long after that, I actually quit in order to revise that book manuscript. And then I got really hungry. When you don't have any income, you can get really hungry. And if Ed McMahon were here saying, well, how hungry did you get? I would say, honestly, I can remember having $5 to eat for the month. So I bought a 20-pound bag of Klamath potatoes. I had potatoes for breakfast, for lunch, and dinner. Man does not live on potatoes alone. So at that time, we had a president named Ronald Reagan, and he made sure everyone could get a 5-pound chunk of cheese.
That's right.
Well, it was actually Velveeta, I can tell you, because I went down and got my 5-pound chunk of cheese. But that's what I lived on for a month. So I was eager to get back into radio, and I did. I went to work for KBOY, and not KBOY yet, KMED. And KMED at that time was a truly news talk station. They've kind of gone to the dark side now with all the, they have all these national programs with these people. But at that time, it was all local, except the network stuff. They did live sports and all kind of, really cool stuff. And I was a news reporter there. So my taking that gig with the TV station kind of helped, in doing the news part. And then I got a job, because that was a part-time job. So, I guess I could tell you this story. It was a time I said things on the phone that I could never have said on the air. The news director had taken a week of vacation. And they said, can you fill in for his job? Because I was the junior news person. So I said, sure. Well, we had 2 people covering the news, and I was determined that we would have the same quality of news when only one person was doing it. So I worked my tail off. Well, the thing was, I expected to be paid for it. Imagine the audacity. I wanted to be paid for my work. So I turned in my timesheet, and it had all of that time that I used to get the news. Well, I happened to be on the air. It was my shift. but this call wasn't on, the call wasn't on the air. So I take this call from the boss who's up in Seattle. He was the owner of the station. And he says, you know, we didn't authorize this overtime. So we'll pay you your regular thing, but we can't pay you for this. That's when I let out a stream of words that you're not allowed to say on the air, and I didn't. It was on the phone. And he was up in Seattle, but I could just see him turning white as a ghost, you know, because I was on the air.
Yeah.
And he says, I want to talk to so-and-so. Well, they're not here. It was lunchtime.
Yeah.
No one else was there at the station. So I finished my shift. I go into the general manager's office, and the general manager says, well, John, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is we're going to pay you for all that time you worked.
Yeah.
The bad news is you no longer work for us.
Yeah, you're fired.
Well, here's the thing. I called up the guy up in Seattle. I apologized. He gave me my job back. I couldn't believe it. I really, you know, I mean, it was just I didn't want to live another month on just potatoes.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
that's why I apologized. He gave me my job back.
Yeah.
So I worked there as long as I wanted to. They didn't pay much money. Around here, you don't get a lot of money.
That's
You just
right.
have to know that.
Yeah.
Well, I somehow from there, my memory doesn't serve me well, I went to KYJC as a part-time job. And so if we'll show up this next one, you'll see what the KYJC. Now, notice no big knobs. It's sliding potentiometers, sliding pots. And so this was like, wow, this is really nice, you know. It's really nice equipment. Some of it kind of old. And then if we go to the next slide, this is the area where I worked. This was the newsroom. And the shoulder there is not me. KYJC had 2 full-time, well-paid news reporters, which as I understand, commercial stations here no longer have news departments.
Okay.
But we would do all of our magic in there. We would type up the stories on a Royal typewriter. And you can see a little bit of the control board. That's where we would have interviews with people on the phone and, you know, record it for use in our sound bites.
Yeah, right.
We also went out in the field with tape recorders and got sound bites from people. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that this is after KYJC. I got replaced by someone who had an old style way of doing news, and I didn't. I had a very conversational side. So if you hear me doing the news, I'd say, hey, you know what happened last night? You know?
Yeah.
And he would come on, last night in Chicago, you know. Yeah. So he just didn't, the style, they thought they wanted that different style. So what you saw there before, which was not a very interesting picture, but I'm one of the first reporters I know to use a computer. That is a Commodore 64.
I thought it looked familiar.
Yeah, computer. You didn't even get a whole line on the screen for a line that you wrote. It broke it up anywhere. But it was a computer, you know, and it was a word processing program. And I see the Daisy printer over there and by the disk drive, you know, big floppy disk, you know, all that stuff. So if you go to the next one, then this is KBOY. I did only news there. I never did any music, but they did rock and roll, you know. And then this is where I would deliver the news. So I had controls where I could control the volume of my sound bites and all that. And then on the other side was where the disc jockey was, and they did all the music and stuff. During this time, when I was hungry, okay, I would go in and do volunteer work for Channel 8, the PBS station.
Right.
Here.
Okay.
And so I got to work cameras.
Yeah.
And I never got to touch the control servers, you know, but I would do cameras. And one time, after I got pretty good at doing the camera, they did like a sale, like an auction.
Yeah.
They had a live auction. And man, that was intense because it was like, get on that thing and zoom in and stop. Okay, good, we're taking you, you know. Okay, now get over to there, you know. So it was really wild, you know, with the cameras, and I really like that. So this is kind of leading up to where we are here. So let's see the next vision here. So this is the last one I have to show you.
Okay.
But it shows a lot of that time. Okay, the fella in the front who has the suit jacket on, He's the guy who replaced me at KYJC. He was and now the news. 6 months after he did, he went off to another radio station. He went to KTMT.
Okay.
So they made this big thing of bringing him back in, and he decided to leave. So in the background, you see kind of typical reporter, little skinny tie, has his camera up, probably from the Mail Tribune. And in between, in great Oregon flannel, holding a microphone and a tape recorder, that's me.
Okay.
Okay, so what this reveals, number one, is I wanted to be 100% Oregon. And I didn't think that wearing a suit was Oregon. Not my Oregon, anyway.
Yeah.
So I just dressed, I loved flannel shirts and that kind of stuff. The other thing it shows, okay, the little tape recorder is mine. The microphone is not. Call them the press corps, the local press corps.
Yeah.
We worked together. I would often pitch it. I would call up if someone had a story that was the public should know about, and I hadn't covered it. I would call them and say, "Hey, look, I have audio from this news conference. Do you need that? Because I need that story that you did."
Yeah.
And we would do that all the time. And to hold a microphone for someone because they couldn't get up there, sure,
Yeah.
no problem. Now, I called a certain reporter, I won't name, and one time my battery had died at a news conference. We were all there, but my battery had died at the news conference. I didn't get the thing. I called him up. I said, "Hey, my battery died. So-and-so didn't get anything. I heard yours on the air. Could you have me get that to use?" "Well, I don't know. We're competitors, aren't we?" And so he finally did it. I actually talked him into doing it. I guess I'm pretty good at talking people into things. So he did give it to me, but afterward he said, "I don't think you should ever call again for such a thing." I didn't. But, we would see each other at news conferences, at things that were going on, if there was something worth covering. We were all there. We would see each other. By the way, we have 10 minutes left of the program.
Yeah,
Isn't that a
okay.
sense of timing?
All right.
So we were all there, and most of us, we all saw ourselves as being in the same boat. We weren't like, cutthroat competition. Now, we love to get a scoop on everybody. And I know that at least my show, and I think several other ones, the TV station's assignment editors would listen to early in the morning to decide, oh, I guess we better get a reporter out on that. So it was a nice time. I was surprised when I recently interviewed the manager at JPR, because he says, they don't, the commercial stations really don't even have news departments anymore. They just read the wire copy.
Yeah.
That's kind of sad because, there is that place for that. So many years go by, David. This is where if it was a movie, you'd spin the calendar. So I decided after KBOY, I was done with radio. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to do something, and I always loved kids. And I thought, if you love kids, you ought to be a teacher. And if you want to be a teacher, you've got to go to college.
Yeah.
So I had 5 great years of college right here at Southern Oregon University. It was SOSC at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
So after all that, I did get a job in teaching. And I started teaching ESL during the later years that I was teaching. I always used a lot of video in my teaching. But what I really discovered in working with English language learners, ESL kids, limited English learners, is that if you did a video project with them, with whatever theme you were working on, they really put the effort in to use their best English because they knew they were being recorded. They knew they were being videotaped.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, people are going to watch this, not just you guys. So, man, they really pushed themselves.
They really focused and bear down on.
Very much so. In fact, I can remember a principal and a couple of teachers. I'd made it where they could see one of their videotapes. This is when they did their report on the solar system. And the teachers were just shaking their head and say, "We never see this. We never, they're real quiet in class, and we never see them speak like this." So I had made this video, and I was involved with a group called Bear Creek Watershed Education Partners, and this group put on a symposium every year. So I presented their video project at the symposium. So imagine, here's another school
Yeah.
of kids sitting there, and they're watching this video, and my kids are over on this side of the room. Now, they begged me not to do that. They said, "Oh my God, I'll die of embarrassment." I said, "No, you're doing it." I said, you're gonna do it. You're gonna sit there." It was so powerful. These kids who were watching the video were like looking at the video and then looking at looking at my kids and kind of like, "That's him. That's her." They were so impressed with that video. Now you have to imagine the power that comes from someone who is always weak in the language. They're always limited. They're so used to not being able to do well in English.
Right.
And here you have these people the same age as them going, "Wow, look at what they did." So it was very, very powerful. Okay, run the clock up another year. I was at in one of my other schools, because at ZSL I had more than one school. The principal and I were not getting along on an issue, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But when you don't get along with principals, they tend to not do what you ask them to do. They would not let my class go to the symposium. So, about the same time, I switched over to charter cable at my house.
Yeah.
And charter, the public access channel in those days was a lot of the sound was JPR radio and slides, endless slides that would go about community events, and one of those slides was become a producer.
Yeah. Okay.
So my wife and I looked at that and, you know what, I think I want to do that. And at the time, my main thought was I want to get my hands back on cameras and
Yeah.
equipment. So I took the class here, and once you take the class, you can get your hands on anything, you know, if you
Yeah.
could do something with it. Well, that's when, about the same time, it occurred to me, I could take the kids' video project and put it on TV. And I did.
Yeah.
And that show, it was called Undamming the Salmon. It ran here on public access no less than 40 times. Might have well been more. And sometimes it would show up on the government channel.
Yeah.
I think the people here just liked the program.
Yeah.
So that really got me thinking about, I wanted to get more involved with TV. About that same time, I would go into a business or a house or even an airport, and you'd see Fox TV on. Inevitably, someone was on there talking about how horrible public schools were and how terrible teachers were. We even had a Secretary of Education that called our union a terrorist group. I'm not making that up. That's true. His name was Ron Page.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought, I've got to let people know that this is baloney. I've
Yeah.
got to let them know that there are positive things happening every day. I see them. You
Yeah,
know?
right.
So I had this idea for a series called Adventures in Education. And so for the first few years, I did it as a field production. And I might produce one show a year, you know, because I had a full-time job, you know.
Yeah.
So it was kind of hard getting all this together. But at least once a year, I did one of these episodes of Adventures in Education. At one point, one of our producers, Denise Ross, had a cancellation, kind of like you had today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she says, "John, how would you like to use the program?" Well, there was an election coming up at that time. GMO was on the ballot. Everyone remembers that, the GMO thing. They were trying to bring back the library in Jackson County, and the 4-H program was about to go away because the county commissioner said, we won't fund it anymore. So with that election going up, I did 3 shows in one day. Only time I've ever gotten by with that, 3 shows in one production time. And I didn't talk about GMO at all, but did a lot of things on the extension service, which was at risk. Didn't do direct things on the library, but especially the extension service, including just informational things, and then an advocate, because the people who work there can't advocate. So that's when I got hooked onto doing these studio shows. And I, to this day, I still do Adventures in Education. And I know we have very little time, but at one point I thought, what if I do an instructional program where I'm actually instructing on the air?
Yeah.
And that was the idea for Ramping Up Your English. And just today I finished doing my 78th episode
That's
of
right,
Ramping
yeah.
Up Your English.
That's right, yeah.
So that's how I came
Yeah.
to be at TV.
Yeah.
Long story. But
Yeah. Well, you certainly create really great, wonderful educational programs here at the studio, and
thank you.
and you deserve the awards for the quality of what you produce. And I thank you for coming on the show. You've turned into a great friend for me.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way.
So, it's great to just have hear your stories.
Thank
So-
you. I enjoy telling it, as you
Yeah,
can tell.
yeah. So, it's, so we've come to the end of this interview with John Letz. I thank him for coming on the show. I thank our crew, the small crew that we have here for this production. And so, this concludes this special emergency edition of the Small Interview with Glamour Dave. And we will see you next time. So, thank you all.
And that's it for this edition of the Small Interview for tonight. We're always eager to hear what you have to say, so follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and support this show at our Patreon page at patreon.com/GlamourDave. You can send us your comments to viewer@glamourdave.com.